Hello and welcome back to another video. In this one we are going to be logging in to the Blood Death Knight. We're going to be completely wiping the talents and we're going to be going through them one by one to figure out what's changed and what hasn't. Now I've already played a key with the Death Knight before, but I haven't had a chance to really sit down and read through what everything does. So I'm going to do that now, just to refamiliarize myself with what's going on and what's changed. My talent build is from Wowhead, so we'll go there and we'll reference that as we go. Need to get rid of companion. All right, here we go. Let's just call this one walkthrough. Is there a way to completely erase all of my stuff? Yeah, it's not really that helpful, but that's okay. We'll just set it up and we'll walk through it, just as we would as if we were setting up a brand new character here. We have a few builds here for Mythic Plus. We are going to go with the build that I have now, which I think is just the default Mythic Plus build. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start with the Death Knight tree. The first thing we have is, of course, the Icebound Fortitude, our 2-minute cooldown, 30% damage reduction with removing that stun effect or making yourself immune to it. So I love that ability. It's gotten me out of so many oh shit situations where I'm stunned, I can't do anything. Boom. Get out of jail free card there. Of course, we have our Death Strike here. Does 57k physical damage and heals you for 30% of all damage taken in the last 5 seconds, minimum 8.5% of your maximum health. The staple. Raise Dead is just a little bit of damage on the top. Raises a ghoul to fight by your side. You can have a maximum of 1 ghoul at a time. It lasts for 1 minute on a 2-minute cooldown. I generally have to be really careful with this sometimes when there's instances where we skip trash, and sometimes I've had the ghoul just run amok and accidentally pull stuff. So while it is like a small DPS increase, it's definitely tilted some keys into deplete mode 1 or 2 times. So here we have Runic Attenuation. This one was at the bottom last time. Now it's up here. Auto attacks have a chance to generate 3 Runic power. This is just going to be passive Runic for using it in Death Strike. Improved Death Strike. Death Strike's cost is reduced by 5 and its healing is increased by 5%. Cleaving Strikes. Now there's a big change with this one. Heart Strike hits up to 3 additional enemies while you remain in Death and Decay, so that means it will always hit 5 because Heart Strike strikes the target and 1 nearby enemy, so it's automatically a cleave. It does 2 damage to 2 targets. This extends it to 5. But they added this thing where when you leave your Death and Decay, you retain its bonus effects for 4 seconds. There are a couple very crucial effects that you get for standing in Death and Decay. First one is Unholy Ground. You gain 5% haste while you remain in your Death and Decay. Another one is Sanguine Ground. You deal 6% more damage and receive 5% more healing while standing in your Death and Decay. So when you're not standing in it, you're not doing as much as you could be. So a lot of the playstyle revolves around standing in your Death and Decay. Sometimes you can't always do that. This will help with not being able to do that. So that's a really nice change. Mind Freeze, that's our interrupt. It's a 15-second cooldown. Smash the target's mind with cold, interrupting spell casting and preventing any spell in that school from being cast for 3 seconds. I love the range on it. It's a 15-yard range. Blinding Sheet, 1 minute cooldown. Targets in a cone in front of you are blinded, causing them to wander disoriented for 5 seconds. Damage may cancel the effect. And when it ends, the enemies are slowed by 50% for 6 seconds. This is just going to be our blanket stop. The cooldown's massive though. Can't use it every pull. It's close, but Anti-Magic Barrier reduces the cooldown of Anti-Magic Shell by 20 seconds and increases its duration and amount absorbed by 40%. That's a buff to the Anti-Magic Shell, which I've noticed is no longer a talent. It is now probably baseline for Blood Decay or Death Knights in general. So that's interesting. It's not in the talent tree anymore. It is in the spell book. Unholy Ground, like we already talked about, 5% haste when you stand in your D&D. Permafrost, your auto attack damage grants you an absorb shield equal to 40% of the damage dealt. So this is just passive absorb shield that'll pop up as you do damage, just like the passive runic power you get from this talent here. This does get buffed later by this talent, Gloom Ward. Absorbs are 15% more effective on you. So that's cool. I don't know. It's just, I don't know if I ever really notice it. Like, dang, it's just kind of there. Same with this one, 20% stamina increase. Veteran of the Third War. Brittle, your diseases have a chance to weaken your enemy, causing your attacks against them to deal 6% increased damage for 5 seconds. So that's going to, so your diseases have a chance to weaken the enemy. The diseases that we use are Blood Plague, so whenever that ticks, you could be doing more damage. So. Icy Talons, your runic power spending abilities increase your melee attack speed by 6% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Your runic power spending abilities, that would be Death Strike, of course. Death Coil, although I've never used this. I bound it because I felt weird to not have it bound, but ideally you should never use this spell, because you should just, if you're in melee, you should use Death Strike, and if you're not in melee, you should be waiting until you're back in melee. I don't know if Raise Ally counts with this, but it's mostly Death Strike that's going to be stacking this buff. Increases your melee attack speed. Of course, we have our AMZ. This is our raid cooldown that I guess is pretty much baseline from what I can see. Put it down, reduces spell damage taken by party raid members by 20%. It lasts for 8 seconds or until it absorbs 4.2 million damage. That's a lot of damage. But I don't know. Health pools are kind of high nowadays, so it might not be. Especially if something's hitting multiple raid members. I don't know if it takes that into account. Unholy Bond increases the effectiveness of your Runeforge effects by 20%. I don't even have a Runeforge on this. Nice. What a pleb. So we should have Rune of the Fallen Crusader. That's going to give us strength every now and again through that buff that we get. And that's just going to increase the effectiveness of that. which I guess is good. You're getting more strength. This was a recent purchase. Where? That's not, yep. Yeah, here is our Rune Forge. Specifically, it says, engrave your weapon with a rune that has a chance to heal you for 4% of your maximum health and increase your total strength by 18% for 15 seconds. So that's more damage, but also it's more parry chance, because you can see strength also increases parry chance. So it's a minor survivability increase every time it procs. I don't track it because it procs quite often, but its uptime is pretty nice. Gloomward I already talked about. It buffs all the absorbs. Pretty sure Blood Shield's an absorb, so it's going to buff that too. Grip of the Dead, this is great for kiting. This is great for the Ghost Weeks, which I don't know if are a thing. I think it's not a thing anymore, is it? I have no idea. I can't remember exactly what they removed and added again. Anyway, this is going to slow initially by 90%, but it decays by 10% every second. So it's really good. Like for at least half of it, it's a 50% slow. That's really significant. More than that, you know? So yeah, at the end of the D&D, it's not slowing for anything, only 10%, but it's still huge. Like things like barely move for like the first 3 or 4 seconds. Really nice to have when you just need to drop it and step away. Soul Reaper has made its return back into the normal rotation. We're going to use this whenever the target is at 35% health or less. What this does is you apply it to the target, and if the target is still alive after 5 seconds, it will deal an additional damage to the target. This is really, really good single target. It doesn't appear to do anything multi-target, so bear that in mind when doing Mythic Plus. Probably something you may not want to spend a rune on. I don't know. I'll have to see what the guide says for rotation, but most of the time this is going to be used to just add an extra damage to that execute phase. Suppression. Damage taken from area of effect attacks reduced by 3%. When suffering a loss of control effect, this bonus is increased by an additional 6% for 6 seconds. This seems pretty minor, and it being buffed by when you have lost control of your character, like being stunned, disoriented, CC'd in some way. I'm not sure exactly what this talent's on about. Maybe it has something to do with PvP. I have no idea. It's always nice to have more damage reduction, but against AoE effects, I don't think I've ever been, oh no, the AoE's coming, I should pop something. It's always been whatever tank busters I need to worry about. So, I don't know. Unless somebody knows what situation this applies to, it's just kind of whatever. Unholy Endurance is really good. It increases Lichborn's duration by 2 seconds, and it makes it a damage reduction cooldown by making you take 50% less damage. This is huge because Lichborn by itself, without this talent, doesn't even do any sort of damage reduction. It increases your leech, and it also makes you immune to charm, fear, and sleep. This is really nice to get out of fear bombs that mobs might cast, or, oops, I didn't kick the fear. I can get out of it, and I can try and, mitigate the situation instead of just falling over or purgatory proccing instantly. the damage reduction on top of that is really, really nice. Insidious Chill, your auto attacks. So again, our auto attacks are doing things. Not only are they generating runic power, our auto attacks are also putting Absorb Shield on us, equal to 40% of their damage, and they reduce the target's auto attack speed by 5% for 30 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. So eventually it's going to be a 20% auto attack speed reduction against us. That is going to reduce our damage intake. Right. Now, this is only going to be useful against bosses because, or like, you know, the big mob in the pack, because it's only one target from what I can read here. It's not reducing the auto attack speed of the entire pull, so this has varied application in Mythic Plus, especially on Fortified Week. Blood Draw, this is one I didn't see last time. I'm not sure if it's new or not. When you fall below 30% health, you drain 62k health from nearby enemies. The damage you take is reduced by 10%, and your death strike cost is reduced by 10 for 8 seconds. Can only occur every 2 minutes. I don't have this tracked. It's just really, really nice to have really cheap death strikes when you really, really need them, when you're about to die. This synergizes great with Will and Necropolis. Damage taken below 30% health is reduced by 35%. So, yeah, blood decays get really spiky, but we have tools like this that really make us shine when we take those big hits. We do have a window to keep ourselves alive because the next few hits probably won't do that much damage because we have this uh, automatic safeguard built in, especially with this talent over here, which I'll talk about later. Rune Mastery, consuming a rune has a chance to increase your strength by 6% for 8 seconds. That's just more damage and parry chance. When you pull an enemy, the damage they deal to you is reduced by 6% for 6 seconds. Interesting. Might want to consider doing that for the most dangerous mob that I think is going to affect me in Mythic Plus, just to get a little more damage reduction on that mob. Already talked about Willow and Necropolis. Null Magic, this I think is new. Magic damage taken is reduced by 10%, so it's flat, and the duration of harmful magic effects against you are reduced by 35%. That's always really good too. So like the fears that are 3 seconds long will only last 2 seconds or stuff like that. Abomination Limb, one of my favorite abilities, Slappy Hands, has a 20-yard range, 2-minute cooldown. Sprout an additional limb. I know I say Slappy Hands like it's plural, but according to the tooltip, it is just one hand. Dealing 192k shadow damage over 12 seconds to all nearby enemies. Deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. Every 1 second, an enemy is pulled to your location if they are further than 8 yards from you. So you have an 8 to 20 yard window. It's like a donut around you that slappy hand is going to grip that in. And the same enemy can only be pulled once every 4 seconds. So you can't just like kind of pull a pack over and over and over again across the room. It just kind of happens in waves. Yeah, this is what it looks like. It's really cool. You can see why some people, including me, would think that it's called slappy hands because there's so many hands. But I think that the slappy hand is just so fast that it just looks like a bunch of hands. I will still be calling it slappy hands plural. But yeah, that's that. Death's Echo is amazing. Death's Advance, which is our speed boost. Death and Decay, which is one of our main AoE abilities and a staple to keeping up a few buffs here. Death Grip also all have 2 charges. That is awesome to have a massive amount of uptime on your D&D. And you've got 2 grips and 2 Death's Advance. Really nice to have. And then the last one for the Death Knight tree, we have Vestigial Shell. think that's how you pronounce that. Uh, Casting Anti-Magic Shell grants 2 nearby allies a lesser anti-magic shell that absorbs up to 134k magic damage and reduces the duration of harmful magic effects against them by 50%. I do not remember having this. This seems new, and it's really, really cool because that's just going to help a lot more in Mythic Plus when your whole team is just getting nuked by all the fortified casters. This is going to really help reduce that damage. So thank you, Blizzard, for giving us something for that. That is going to be the Death Knight tree. Now I'm going to talk about the Blood tree. This is where it seems like, over here it seems like you get a few abilities and then it just buffs everything. You know, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, just a few abilities over here. Here we have like a bunch of stuff right at the top here. Heart Strike, one of our most commonly pressed buttons to generate all that runic power for death strikes. Like I said earlier, it's a cleave. It causes physical damage, and it reduces the enemy's movement speed by 20% for 8 seconds. You get 2 runic power per additional enemy struck. So I think this generates like 5 to 10. I can't exactly remember, but this, like, so you're hard striking a lot, and this is just going to build a bunch of runic power for you. Cleaving strikes, standing in D&D, is going to really, really help build a lot more runic with this, so that's another reason why it is absolutely crucial that we're always standing in D&D, especially when we're tanking 5 mobs at least. Mirrorrend is a bigger generator of Bone Shield. I think it's our biggest one. We kind of have a mix, which I'll mention later. This is going to smash the target, dealing 33k physical damage, and it generates 3 charges of Bone Shield. Usually I'll hit this very early on the pull, and then I will maintain Bone Shield with Death's Caress. Grips will also now generate a rune. I think it's 1 rune per grip, and this even applies to Gorfine's Grasp, so if you're gripping multiple enemies, you will generate the number of runes of mobs that you grip in, from what I understand. I haven't fully tested this yet, but I think that's how it works. This will give us the Bone Shield, which we need to maintain at all times. Bone Shield surrounds you with a barrier of whirling bones, increasing armor by almost 114,000 or almost 14k. That's a lot. I think it's like 20% physical DR, if I remember right. So not having this on is huge. Each melee attack against you consumes a charge, lasts 30 seconds or until all charges are consumed. Now I can't remember the exact time it is, but there is a cooldown on how many charges can be consumed, and I think it's either 1.5 or 2 seconds. So if you're being hit by multiple mobs, it's not like your Bone Shield's completely being eaten up. There is a internal cooldown on it consuming that charge. So if you are AoE tanking, you will see this drop, but not as quickly as you think. Just make sure you're keeping it 5 stacks or above. Blood Boil is I would say our main AoE ability. It deals 35k shadow damage and infects all enemies within 10 yards with Blood Plague, which is our dot. It drains health from the target, and I'm not sure how many people know this, but when it says drains, that is a leech. That is not just damage, it's draining it from the mob to you, so that's like a passive leech that we get. And that just stays on the target. It keeps threat. It's really, really nice. Like I said, it drains the target. And I think it synergizes with something coming up here. Vampiric Blood is our main defensive cooldown. You will hit this pretty much on cooldown. If you are tanking something, it has value. And as I will explain up ahead, it will also come off cooldown much, much quicker than you think. It's up very, very quickly. Embrace your undeath, increasing your maximum health by 30% and increasing all healing and absorbs received by 30% for 10 seconds. I'm hitting this all the time, and as you death strike, it reduces the cooldown of this ability with Red Thirst. So it just snowballs into Vampiric Blood after Vampiric Blood. It's just always nice to have up. Bone Collector. I mentioned this a little bit before. This is the new one where whenever you pull an enemy, you generate 1 charge of Bone Shield. This is really nice. So now if I go in and I just Gorfine's Grasp, I won't have to worry about spending another global cooldown on trying to get my Bone Shield up. I can just go into generating more RP for those early death strikes so that I don't just fall over right at the start. It's going to make us a little bit more sustainable right at the start of those pulls instead of basically going in raw and naked and having to set everything up while getting smacked in the face the whole time. Ossuary, this is why you want to have at least 5 Bone Shield charges at all times because it reduces the cost of your Death Strike. Also increases your maximum runic power by 10, so that just helps you bank more runic power to maintain, a good health pool with proper Death Strike usage. This adds up very quickly, so it is crucial to have those 5 Bone Shield charges at all times. It's not the end of the world. You really have to evaluate what's going on in the situation. For example, if you're at 20% health and you have 60 runic power and you have 3 Bone Shield stacks and you're like, I need to have 5 runic power or 5 Bone Shield stacks to reduce the cooldown of the Death Strike. If you hit Marrow Rend there to try and get those stacks, you're going to blow that gold global and you might die because the next melee might get 20% or more of your health and kill you, and you should be just death striking there instead of putting your Bone Shield back up. So keep that in mind. You really have to be smart about when you're using your runic and when you're not doing it. For the most part, if you're not at 5 stacks, you should be hitting Marrow Rend or Death Crest and getting it back up there. Improved Heart Strike is just going to increase the Heart Strike damage. We're using that all the time. Ossified Vitriol. Man, some of these words I've never even seen in my life. When you lose a Bone Shield charge, the damage of your next Marrow Rend is increased by 50%, stacking up to 75%. So I think that's 5 times. I don't really know what the goal of this is because Marrow Rend is not used often, in my opinion. But having its damage buffed is pretty nice because when you do have to use it, you're not sacrificing damage on heart, that you would otherwise heart strike from not hitting Marrow Rend. I don't know. We'll see. I haven't really played enough. I don't know if Marrow Rend's more of a thing, but I usually just use Death Crest and keep it up. Let's move on here. Heartbreaker. Heart Strike generates 2 additional runic power per target hit, so that's going to synergize with this one that already gives you 2 per additional enemy struck. That's just a lot more runic power coming from Cleaving Strikes and Heart Strike. Dancing Rune Weapon. This is our main DPS cooldown that should be used on cooldown. Summons a rune weapon for 16 seconds that mirrors your melee attacks and bolsters your defenses. While active, you gain 40% parry chance. I cannot stress enough that this needs to be used on cooldown. I sometimes sit on it for no reason at all, and I don't know why I do that. I should just keep hitting it, because earlier you'll figure out why. I want to be able to talk about the talent. Perseverance of the Ebon Blade. When Crimson Scourge is consumed, you gain 6% versatility. Crimson Scourge, I think, is baseline then, because I don't see it here. So let's go to our spell book. And here it is. Crimson Scourge is your auto attacks, again, doing things, on targets infected with your blood bag, your dot that's applied by either Blood Boil or Death's Caress. That has a chance to make your next Death and Decay cost no runes and resets cooldown. This is really nice to have another Death and Decay to do what you want with. So this is going to proc once you drop that D&D. You're going to get that 6% verse for 6 seconds. I barely noticed this. It's just a nice bonus. Gorfine's Grasp is back. It's going to grip all enemies within 15 yards of a hostile or friendly target. This is a targeted ability on a mob, and if you don't have anything selected, I think it now will grip to the Death Knight. And the reason I think this is because I can use it without having a target, and it even grips me back. I'm not sure if you saw it stutter right there. It's very interesting. So if you don't have a target, it will just grip to you. Most of the time when you're going in, you're gonna drop a D&D and like click like a caster or something, and then that's when you would just Gorfiend everything. It's really nice because you get all the Bone Shield stacks as well. Improved Bone Shield. This is awesome. Having Bone Shield up increases your haste by 10%. So if you don't have Bone Shield up, you're losing out on a lot of stuff. You're losing out on all the armor that you get, and you're losing out on haste as well. It's a tragedy if your Bone Shield drops off. Insatiable Blade. Dancing Rune Weapon generates 5 Bone Shield charges. So whenever you hit it, you should probably be... at this point, you can be at 7 stacks and hit it, so you do have a little more wiggle room. I usually tend to hit it just when I have room for it. So when I'm at 5 stacks is probably when I'll be using it now. Just so you don't cap on Bone Shield charges. And then when a charge is consumed, this is the big one here, the cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds. So every time you drop a Bone Shield stack, this cooldown drops by 5 seconds. So every time that you're sitting on this cooldown and you have Bone Shield up and you're watching Bone Shield charges drop, you are losing out on cooldown reduction. That is why you must hit this on cooldown all the time, because the more it's off cooldown, the more you'll get back, and it just snowballs. It's really fun. Rapid Decomposition. Your Blood Plague and Death and Decay damage deal damage 18% more often, and Blood Plague leeches 50% more health. So this is how I know that Drain means leech, because of this tooltip right here. Blood Plague leeches 50% more health. It wouldn't say that if that wasn't its core mechanic. So that's how I've been able to piece together that Drain means leech. Reinforced Bones. This is amazing. It increases armor gain from Bone Shield by 10%, and it can stack 2 additional times, which means we can have a total of 12 Bone Shield stacks now. This is really going to come into play when I talk about the Bone Storm change later. Everlasting Bond summons 1 additional copy of Dancing Rune Weapon and increases its duration by 8 seconds. This is cool because you have 2 other weapons that are yours fighting the mob, and sometimes when mobs are moving around, you can see them dancing around. It's so funny. This is great. I think it's like what? It's baseline 16 seconds, but wait, is it 8 seconds and increases it to 8? Yeah. Yeah, it's 16 seconds total right now. So it doesn't buff that any further. Voracious Death Strike's healing is increased by 15% and grants you 12% leech for 8 seconds. That's awesome. Death Strike already does a lot of healing, so it buffs that even more, and we get passive leech. I would say that this is up a lot. I'm trying to imagine a scenario where I wouldn't be death striking at least once every 8 seconds in Mythic Plus, so this is a huge buff to our already huge amount of leech that we have. Coagulopathy, I think I pronounced that right. Enemies affected by Blood Plague take 5% increased damage from you, and Death Strike increases the damage of your Blood Plague by 30% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. So eventually we'll be doing 25% more increased damage to mobs, and they'll be taking more damage from our Blood Plague. So that's going to translate into more leech that we're leeching off of them. Again, the synergy for this and the class fantasy is really cool. I have never taken Mark of Blood, um, so I'm not even going to talk about it. We take Tombstone though. It's on a 1 minute cooldown. Consume up to 5 Bone Shields charges. For each charge consumed, you gain 6 runic power and absorb damage equal to 6% of your maximum health for 8 seconds. So for each charge, let's say if you hit it every time at 5, that means you would get a 30% shield for your maximum health for 8 seconds. This is cool because it grants you just another. Like, I've used this shield a lot in Mythic Plus when I'm like, I don't have a very good answer for this next tank buster. Like, VB's down, Icebound Fortitude's down, Lichborn's down, AMS is down. I'm about to take, like, for example, the last boss in Ultiman's Sand Breath. That is where this comes into play. Also, the last boss of Azure Vault, the Dragon Strike, this ability really, really helps against those tank busters where you're like, I really don't have another answer for that. So be careful around this ability because I get into a habit where I'm like, I just used Dancing Rune Weapon and I want to already reduce its cooldown by 25 seconds instantly, which this does because you consume the Bone Shield charges. It synergizes with um, the talent where whenever you lose a Bone Shield, you get it reduces the cooldown of our yeah, this one. When a charge is consumed, it reduces the cooldown of Dancing Rune Weapon. So that will instantly chop 25 seconds off of our 2 minute cooldown here. I like doing that as soon as it's on cooldown because like I said earlier, the longer that you wait, you're just losing out on more Dancing Rune Weapons going forward. But if you don't have an answer for the next Tank Buster, try to save Tombstone. There's been a few times where I've hit it on cooldown, and then the next Tank Buster came, and I'm like, man, if I just would have saved Tombstone, everything would have been fine. I was just too greedy trying to max min the Dancing Rune Weapon. So that's my little speech about Tombstone. Consumption is back. I remember this ability from Legion. I don't think it was ever taken, or if it was even in the tree last time, but I do miss these abilities, so I'm glad they're both back. Consumption is the AoE option of these two. It's going to strike all enemies in front of you with a hungering attack that deals 40k physical damage, and then heals you for 150% of that damage. So it strikes all enemies. So when you, if you're low on health and you go into a pull, that's gonna really, really help with that. Like since this is on a short cooldown, we're gonna be able to do this like almost at the start of every single pull in Mythic Plus, and it generates 2 runes. That's amazing. That's gonna set you up really nicely for the pull. I can't wait to use even more. Like, look at all these cooldowns that we get. I'm not gonna have these 2 trinkets, but other than that, this is all the cooldowns that I use to stay alive right here. Pretty insane how many things we have. Um, so I'm really excited to have that back. It also causes blood plague damage to occur 50% more quicker for 8 seconds. That's just going to increase that damage in Leech again. I already mentioned Sanguine Ground. Make sure you're standing in D&D. Shattering Bone. It only has 1 rank this time, I've noticed. This used to have 2. So you can kind of play around with how much AoE damage you're doing. Not anymore, though. It's just 1. And whenever a Bone Shield is consumed, so on top of your Dancing Rune Weapon cooldown going down, you will also deal only 2,500 damage to nearby enemies, but I'm sure that's AoE. This is tripled when you are within your Death and Decay. So there's a really big synergy that I need to mention here because I, more often than not, will do this incorrectly. And I would say 60% of the time I get it right every time, but it varies. So this damage is tripled when you're in your Death and Decay, and Tombstone will affect this because Tombstone instantly will remove 5 Bone Shield stacks. So this is going to go off really, really big when you're in your D&D and when you have 5 Bone Shield stacks and you have Tombstone. So those are the prerequisites to making sure you maximize the damage from Shattering Bone. You you need to you need to be standing in that D&D. You need to have the 5 stacks that you maximize the cooldown reduction on Dancing Rune Weapon, and you need to have, and obviously this needs to be up, but those things need to be satisfied. There are times where sometimes I'll be moving the mobs and I'll need a tank, but I'll need to use this Tombstone Tank Buster, or to I need to use Tombstone to survive the Tank Buster, and I'll be too concerned with maximizing the damage and Death and Decay that I'll just die because, like I said earlier, if I don't have Tombstone as a backup Tank Buster cooldown, I might just flat out die. So be careful with this. A lot of the times I try to maximize the damage that this does, but sometimes it's an emergency situation. I can't wait for the stars to align for Tombstone to be perfect value. Um, so again, keep that in mind. Tombstone usage can get you kind of into a trap, so that's just my reminder one last time on that one. Heart Rend is going to uh, make so Heart Strike has a chance to increase the damage of your next Death Strike by 20%, more passive damage. Ironheart, this will make our blood shield that's generated from our Death Strikes duration increase by 2 seconds, and it absorbs 20% more damage. That's awesome. Red Thirst, I mentioned this earlier, it reduces the cooldown of Vampiric Blood by 2 seconds per 10 runic power spent. I think Death Strike gets down to 35? Yeah, right now it's at 40, and it goes down to 35 once you get Ossuary at 5 Bone Shield stacks. So you're going to be reducing the cooldown of VB by, what is that, 6 seconds per Death Strike? And it's already only a minute and a half. That you're going to be hitting VB so much. So just make sure you're on top of hitting VB and Dancing Rune on cooldown. These things will come back up very, very quickly. All right, our final row here. Bone Storm has made its return. It has a 1-minute cooldown. Consume your Bone Shield charges to create a whirl of bone and gore that batters all nearby enemies, dealing 11k shadow damage every 1 second and healing you for 3% of your maximum health every time it deals damage up to 15%. It deals reduced damage beyond 8 targets. It lasts 1 second per Bone Shield charge spent, and rapidly generates a Bone Shield every 1 second. So I think this consumes a maximum of 10, which is really cool because we just got um, an additional 2 Bone Shield stacks. So we can hit this at 12, and even if somehow we don't generate any Bone Shield stacks, we're still left with 2 to recover. But if you use 10 seconds of it, and then the 10 seconds go by, you'll get those Bone Shield stacks one at a time back over time. So in the long term, this ability is just free damage. It's really great. I've been hitting it on cooldown, even on boss fights, because I don't know, I'm just a monkey and want to see the bones swirling. I have no idea. It's primarily probably supposed to be used for AoE situations, but it looks so cool. I use it on I use it on boss fights all the time. It's just funny. Um, Purgatory is really nice. Sometimes I will just let cooldowns go just to see how hard the trash will hit me before I die. Um, it kind of helps me figure out what pulls I can save cooldowns on and what pulls I can use cooldowns on, just to have a better synergy going forward. It's really helpful for testing things out. Can I survive X, Y, and Z? You can like walk through beams and die, and then because your death strike damage will be so through the roof, you'll just death strike once and pop right back to life. Um, what's annoying about this is if you use a death skip, you don't get that as a failsafe. If like let's say you're skipping to the last boss on a tyrannical dungeon, and you use like a death skip or something, now you don't have purgatory for the boss fight, and if you make a single mistake on the boss fight and you die, you don't have that. So keep that in mind. It's only as useful as you make it to be. I would say that this can be swapped out at some point if you get to the point where you're tanking trivial content and you never die. Um, because I always make a joke when I make a mistake and Purgatory goes off. It's like, well, I took the talent, so I'm just getting value out of it. Because technically, if you never die, this is never used, so it could be better spent elsewhere. But who knows where you would put that? And then our last pick here is Bloodshot. While Blood Shield is active, you deal 25% increased physical damage. This is just a huge buff to our damage moving forward. Um, Last season, the talents played out where you would drop this and Voracious to get Umbilicus Eternus, but I'm not sure if that's still a thing. I will keep this build probably moving forward. I have yet to play around with the other ones. Um, I'm really liking the new changes. Let me see if there's anything in the spell book that I haven't mentioned yet about the Death Knight that I think you guys should know. Um, If you don't know what Blood Shield is, that is our mastery. Each time you heal yourself with Death Strike, you gain 88.4% of that amount healed as physical damage absorption. Now it's just physical, it's not magical. We did have that talent that reduces our magical damage taken, and we have AMS, and we have AMZ. But for the most part, what makes us reign supreme against magical damage is our ability to Death Strike so much. This will only help with physical damage. And of course, to help buff our damage, the mastery will also increase our attack power. This is probably the stat to stack when you're doing Mythic Plus because the majority of the Mythic Plus damage is physical damage, and just having larger blood shields when you Death Strike is really good. Death's Caress is not something that's in the talent tree. It is a ranged ability that costs 1 rune. It applies Blood Plague, and it generates 2 Bone Shield charges. Um, This I'll sometimes use at the start of a pull as well when, let's see, I'm running in, I drop the D&D on top of the mobs, and then I usually pop Dancing Rune Weapon, but because I haven't even gotten into melee range yet, I can hit him with the Death's Caress, and that will give me the Bone Shield charges that I need to just go right into my rotation. Instead of spending it on a Mirror I can spend that next global on Hard Strike instead just to get my RP going. So that's why I like to use Death's Caress that way. It's really helpful for AoE pulls, and it's got that 30-yard range pulls rather, and it's got that 30-yard range. Um, it's also nice to get a boss pull started and then follow up quickly with that Dark Command so you can get that Death Strike going right into the boss for that snap threat on a single target. Let's see. On a pale horse, you are as hard to stop as death itself and increases your mounted speed by 20%. This is subtle, but if you're ever like in a mounted scenario and everybody's kind of racing each other, you'll notice the Death Knight slowly but surely inch ahead, and that's thanks to this talent on a pale horse. Um, we have combat res. It costs 30 runic power, which is almost a full death strike, but it's instant. So that's really cool. The person will re-enter combat with 60% health and at least 20% mana. Path of Frost lets you walk on water. Um, it lasts for 10 minutes on you, and it's within 50 yards of you. So if anybody runs out of that 50-yard uh, circle around you, they're just gonna like drop right through the water. They're not gonna have water walking anymore. So if you are using this to water walk, do not outrun your Death Knight and try to keep up with your Death Knight because if they like run faster than you on their mount, or if you're run faster than them on your mount, you are going to just drop into the water, and it's funny when I see it happen. Death's Advance. is a really cool ability. It really helps with how slow we are, and I love it for the immunity to knockbacks. It's made a few fights this expansion trivial, and I hope it will continue to make some situations trivial in the next one. Um, Death Coil I never use. I don't even know why I bound it. I just had the extra keybind and I said, fuck it, why not just throw it on there. Dark Command is our taunt, 8-second cooldown, 30-yard range. We have Chains of Ice, which is a single target slow. It's 70% for 8 seconds. This is cool for those fights that have the one mob that come in. You need to kind of kill, slow it, CC it, kill it. Really nice for those situations. That is going to be it for that spell book. I don't think there's anything over here to mention. So I think that is going to wrap it up for this talent walkthrough. I feel like I've gained a better understanding of what's changed and what hasn't, and what I'll have moving forward will just be added on to with these hero talents, which will not be unlocked until the War Within drops. Um, with that said, that is going to be where this video ends. I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.